You spend months, I mean literally months, teaching a learner a flawless skill in the clinic.
Yeah, the data is beautiful.
Right. The trend line is, perfectly accelerating. It's basically a masterpiece of behavioral shaping. But the second that learner walks out the door into the real world, the behavior completely falls apart.
Just zero responding.
Zero. And why? Well, it's not because the learner failed. It's because you didn't program for generalization.
Exactly. You built a highly specialized behavior that can really only survive in controlled laboratory.
Yeah.
The moment the temperature of the room changes or
Yeah.
like the lighting shifts, the behavior just goes extinct.
So welcome to the deep dive. Our mission today is absolute mastery of the BACB 6th edition task list item G.15.
Which is to design and evaluate procedures to promote stimulus and response generalization.
Right. And we are pulling directly from elite clinical study guides to completely decode this. So why are the stakes so high here?
We really need to be explicitly clear about this. For you listening, this isn't just about, memorizing definitions so you can click the right button on a screen.
Yeah. No, not at all.
This is about creating lasting behavioral change. I mean, if your intervention doesn't generalize across environments, people, and materials, you haven't actually changed the client's life.
Right. And today, we are focusing on the deep clinical mechanisms, the applied examples you actually see in homes and schools.
And those specific cognitive traps that always trip up test takers.
Absolutely. Plus the advanced analytical thinking that really separates a standard practitioner from the top 1% in our field.
So let's get into it.
Let's do it. So the absolute core of this entire task list item comes down to a fundamental divide, right? Stimulus generalization versus response generalization.
Yep, a big two.
And sitting there reviewing your notes, it is incredibly easy for your brain to get these two tangled up because, they sound nearly identical.
They really do. But clinically, they represent completely different behavioral mechanisms.
So how do we cleanly separate these two in our minds?
It really comes down to isolating what is changing and what is staying the same.
Oh.
So let's start with stimulus generalization.
Okay.
This occurs when a new, untrained antecedent stimulus evokes the exact same behavior that a previously trained stimulus evoked.
So you have a single rigid response, but it is being triggered by multiple different stimuli.
Precisely. The behavior itself does not change. The environment changing around the behavior is what's new.
Right. So one response, multiple stimuli. Let's ground this with a metaphor to kind of make it stick.
Go for it.
Think of stimulus generalization as using your favorite skeleton key to open a bunch of different doors. The key, which represents your behavior, stays exactly the same.
Right.
But it works on the front door, the back door, the office door. The stimuli, meaning the doors, are changing, but your physical action doesn't alter at all.
That is a highly accurate way to conceptualize it. Now contrast that with response generalization.
Which you will also see clinically referred to as response induction, right?
Yes, exactly. Response induction. And this happens when the learner emits completely untrained novel responses that are functionally equivalent to the trained target behavior.
Okay, so the antecedent stimulus, the environment, remains exactly the same.
Yes, but the learner suddenly generates multiple varying responses to deal with it. One stimulus, multiple responses.
So following that same metaphor, response generalization is when you stand in front of just one locked door.
Right.
But instead of using the same key every time, you suddenly figure out how to pick the lock, or you kick the door down, or you climb through the window.
Exactly. It's the exact same door.
Yeah.
But you are generating brand new, untrained solutions that achieve the exact same function getting inside.
Oh, wow. Yeah. That makes so much sense.
And that lock-picking scenario is a massive clinical victory. When a learner generates new responses, it expands the behavior class to function within a wider variety of contexts.
It proves they aren't just acting like a programmed robot, right?
Yeah.
Just emitting one rigid topography.
Right. They are dynamically adapting to the actual contingencies of their environment.
Okay, let's translate this into some applied ABA scenarios straight from our source material. There's an example of a client. Let's call him Tim.
Okay, Tim.
So Tim learns to play a specific song on an acoustic guitar in his bedroom. The training stimulus is the acoustic guitar.
Sure.
A few days later, he goes to a friend's house and he picks up an electric guitar. Now, the weight of the instrument is different. The string tension requires less force. The auditory feedback is completely different.
Completely different stimulus.
Right. But without a single second of additional training, Tim plays the exact same song perfectly. The new stimulus, the electric guitar, evoked the previously trained behavior.
And that right there is stimulus generalization in action. The topography of the response. So like the literal physical placement of his fingers on the
It's
frets.
the biomechanics of his strumming hand.
Exactly. It remained identical. The guitar changed, but the behavior held strong across those varying physical properties.
Right. But then our sources pivot to a social skills example to highlight response generalization. And I think this is where the real clinical magic
Oh,
happens.
absolutely.
So imagine running a social skills group. You explicitly teach a learner to greet adults with the very formal scripted phrase like, pleased to make your acquaintance.
Very rigid.
Super rigid. You reinforce it. The data looks great. It reaches mastery. But a week later, on the playground, that same learner walks up to a peer and says, what's up? Or, hey.
Which, crucially, was never trained in the clinic.
Right.
The response topography completely changed. The actual physical movements of the vocal cords and the words coming out of their mouth are physically different from what was reinforced in that social skills group.
But it serves the exact same function.
Exactly. Initiating a social greeting to access peer attention, the learner independently generated a novel response to meet the contingency of the playground.
And this really highlights why response generalization is so vital for social validity. I mean, if a teenager walks up to another teenager at a skate park and says, pleased to make your acquaintance.
They are probably going to face immediate social punishment.
Exactly. The natural environment demands varied responding. So how do we actually program for this?
Well, our sources detail a vocational training scenario using a strategy called teaching loosely.
Oh, right, the sorting bins.
Yeah, they describe a clinical team teaching adults with developmental disabilities to sort items into bins for a donation center.
Okay.
And to promote generalization, they intentionally vary their instructions. So sometimes saying sort, sometimes organize, sometimes group them.
Okay, wait, I have to push back on this.
Go ahead.
If you are teaching a complex baseline skill to an adult with a cognitive delay, and you constantly change your moving from sort to organize to group, aren't you just being a messy, inconsistent teacher?
It feels like that, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, how does a learner ever grasp the baseline skill if you keep moving the goalposts and confusing them with different words?
It is a totally valid concern, but it misunderstands the mechanism of stimulus control. You aren't moving the goalposts. You are expanding the playing field.
Okay, explain that.
If you act like a rigid metronome, right, sitting in the exact same chair, using the exact same tone of voice, and giving the exact same instructions sort every single time.
Which is what a lot of early intervention looks like.
Right. But if you do that, the behavior becomes tightly bound to that highly specific acoustic wave. The learner becomes extremely prompt dependent.
Oh, I see.
So if they eventually get a job at the donation center and their new supervisor says, organize these, the learner will just freeze.
The behavior won't fire because the precise antecedent stimulus is missing.
Exactly.
Ah, so you are basically inoculating the learner against the chaos of the real world by injecting a little bit of calculated chaos into the training environment.
Precisely. Teaching loosely prevents irrelevant stimuli from acquiring strict stimulus control.
So you want the behavior controlled by the task itself, the items needing to be sorted.
Right, not by the specific pitch of your voice or the exact phrasing of your demand.
Okay, that makes sense. So if we need to prepare them for the real donation center, why not just build a perfect, exact replica of the donation center inside the clinic?
Oh, man.
Right, because our sources point out that this is a massive cognitive trap for clinicians, and test writers absolutely love to exploit it.
They do. It's a classic trap. You read a scenario about promoting generalization, and your brain immediately gravitates toward the answer that says, make the clinic exactly like the real world.
And if you choose that,
You demonstrate a fatal misunderstanding of behavioral mechanisms. The training environment should be similar, which is a well-documented strategy known as programming common stimuli.
right.
But it must never be identical.
Why not, though? I mean, if the goal is for them to perform at the donation center, shouldn't a flawless clone of that center be the ultimate training ground?
Because true generalization requires the learner to respond to new and different stimuli. If you perfectly clone the natural environment inside your clinic, you aren't testing generalization.
You're just testing discrimination in a really expensive room.
Exactly. You haven't proven the behavior can survive variation at all. You want the learner to be able to encounter an arbitrary, irrelevant stimulus like a supervisor they have never met, or a different colored sorting bin.
Or unexpected background noise?
Yes, and still execute the skill.
Yeah.
If the environments are identical, you have completely failed to prepare them for the inevitable, unpredictable variations of the natural world.
Wow. Okay, so we want them generalizing to new and unpredictable things. But what happens when the human brain goes too far the other way?
Oh,
Yeah.
overgeneralization.
What happens when they generalize too broadly? Let's talk about the toddler from our source text, Amy.
Oh, the beard example.
Yes. Amy's dad has a thick beard and a mustache. She learns to say da-da in his presence, and she gets a massive amount of reinforcement. Lots of hugs, lots of attention.
So the behavior is established.
Yeah. The behavior is totally established. But then Amy goes to the grocery store and starts pointing at every single man walking down the aisle who has facial hair and just yells, da-da.
It's a very common developmental stage, obviously.
Yeah.
But clinically, it is a classic case of faulty stimulus control. Specifically, overgeneralization.
The mechanism here is fascinating, though, isn't it?
It really is. The behavior saying da-da has come under the control of a stimulus class that is far too broad. The human brain naturally looks for shortcuts, for the most salient feature of an environment.
Right. So instead of the behavior anchoring to the defining complex features of her actual father.
Like his specific eye color, voice pitch, height, and scent.
Exactly. Instead of all that, her brain latched onto a single, highly visible feature, facial hair.
The facial hair basically eclipsed everything else.
So how do we actually fix that mechanically?
Well, the clinical solution is differential reinforcement to tighten the boundaries of the stimulus class. You reinforce the vocalization da-da only in the presence of the actual father. And crucially, you withhold reinforcement. So you place the behavior on extinction in the presence of other bearded men.
So the learner must contact the contingency that facial hair alone does not reliably predict reinforcement for that specific response.
Precisely.
Which brings us to probably the most dangerous assumption a practitioner can make, the myth of free generalization.
Oh, yeah.
Our materials heavily cite Stokes and Baer's seminal 1977 paper, which outlined a phenomenon they quite sarcastically called the train and hope method.
It is exactly what it sounds like.
Yeah, you train a skill in the clinic, you cross your fingers, and you just hope it naturally bleeds over into the client's home life.
And Stokes and Baer made it a definitive rule for our field. Clinicians must act as if there is no such thing as free generalization.
It just doesn't exist.
No. The human brain does not automatically transfer skills across environments without prompting. Generalization never just happens naturally. It must be systematically engineered into the intervention from the very first baseline observation.
I mean, if you are waiting until the skill is mastered in the clinic to start thinking about the home environment, you are actively planning for failure.
Absolutely.
Let's pivot a bit to how this theoretical knowledge is weaponized against you. For you listening, preparing to sit down at a testing center, we really need to decode the specific logic these exam writers use.
Let's do it. Let's look at the mechanics behind the questions.
Okay, rule number 1.
The exam writers are basically testing whether you understand function versus form. If a scenario describes a learner emitting completely untrained responses, but those new responses serve the exact same function as the originally trained behavior.
Then the correct answer is response generalization.
Exactly. Your indicators are keywords like novel, untrained, and functionally equivalent.
It's the lock-picking metaphor. The door opens, but the method is brand new.
Right.
Okay, what about the acceptee questions? The ones designed to basically make you second-guess yourself.
Test writers love to ask what is not a strategy for promoting generalization, and they will bury the phrase, making the instructional setting identical to the generalization setting in the options.
And you choose that as your exception.
Always. Choose that as your exception, as we broke down earlier. That is testing discrimination, not generalization. You want common stimuli, but never an identical replication.
Right. And there is one strategy hidden in the advanced text that is just an absolute powerhouse. Teaching the learner to actively recruit reinforcement.
Yes.
So imagine you teach a student to finish their math worksheet, right? But then you explicitly teach them to walk up to their teacher, tap them on the shoulder, and say, hey, I finished my work. Can you check it?
It's brilliant.
Why is that considered the ultimate generalization hack?
Because you are teaching the client to trap their own behavior in the natural contingencies of the environment.
Oh, trap their own behavior. I love that phrasing.
Think about the mechanics of it. In a clinic, the BCBA is constantly hovering, delivering reinforcement on a super dense schedule.
Right. But the real world doesn't do that.
No. Teachers are distracted. Parents are exhausted. By teaching the learner to actively demand feedback, you basically empower them to go harvest the reinforcement they need to maintain their own skill.
You have effectively automated the maintenance
And you
phase.
turn the client into their own behavior analyst.
That is so powerful, which leads us perfectly into the absolute pinnacle of our sources today, the clinical power insight.
Here we go.
This is the advanced theoretical thinking that takes you from someone who just understands the textbook to someone who profoundly changes human lives. The texts talk about this concept of the generalized generalizer.
Right.
What is actually happening in the brain here?
It is the ultimate goal of our science. The mark of an elite clinician is moving a client beyond rigid stimulus control and rote memorization. You want to prepare them to make derived relations. This is known as generative learning, or
Yeah.
stimulus equivalence. It means the learner can derive a completely untrained, untaught relationship between stimuli just by interacting with them.
Give me the ELI 5, explain, I'm a 5 foot on how a derived relation actually works.
Sure. You directly teach a client that a physical dime is worth 10 cents. That is relation A to B.
Got it.
Then, you directly teach them that 2 physical nickels are worth 10 cents. That is relation B to C.
Right.
A standard practitioner stops there. But through generative learning, the learner suddenly derives without you ever directly teaching it that a physical dime is functionally equivalent to 2 nickels.
Oh, wow. That is relation A to C.
Exactly. You didn't teach it, but their brain generated the relational frame.
That is where the magic happens. The learner takes the isolated building blocks you gave them and just starts constructing their own complex behavioral architecture. But we have to ground all this high-level theory in contextual reality. Because all of this stimulus generalization, response generalization, generative learning, none of it matters if we don't look at the harsh reality of maintenance.
Oh, absolutely. Maintenance dictates everything. A behavior, no matter how beautifully generalized, will only survive in the wild if it contacts natural reinforcement, period.
Right. If your beautifully shaped replacement behavior isn't supported by the actual rules and contingencies of the client's home
Or their chaotic public school classroom.
or their workplace, the behavior will inevitably revert to baseline. The old problem behavior will return because the old behavior was the only thing getting reinforced.
It doesn't matter how brilliant your clinical programming was.
Exactly.
And this is why top 1% practitioners don't just train the client. They analyze and manipulate the natural environment.
They train the parents on differential reinforcement.
Yes. They collaborate with the classroom teachers to ensure schedules of reinforcement are aligned. They evaluate the peer group.
Right. They ensure that once the intensive clinical intervention fades out, the natural environment is completely primed to catch and reinforce those newly generalized behaviors.
You have to build a supportive ecosystem, not just a supportive clinic.
If this helped you, follow behavioral intelligence, share this episode with another RBT or BCBA who's studying, and leave a comment or review. That's how we grow and how I keep creating high-level content for you.
At Amethyst Therapy Services, Inc., we build clinicians, not just test passers. www.amethysttherapyservices.com, OENFO, at amethysttherapyservices.com.
As you close out today, I want to leave you with one final advanced puzzle to ponder, pulling from the matching law referenced in the deepest posts of our materials.
Okay.
Imagine you do everything right. You successfully generalize a functional communication skill across multiple settings. The client can request a break perfectly at home, at school, and in the community.
Sounds great.
But the natural reinforcement schedules in those settings wildly differ. Say, mom continuously reinforces the appropriate request every single time the client asks, mom grants the break. Okay. But dad, maybe he's stressed with work. He suddenly places that exact same generalized request on extinction, ignoring the communication entirely. Based on the mechanics of behavioral contrast and the matching law, how will that disparity dictate where the client allocates their generalized behavior tomorrow?
That is a great question.
It's not just about if the behavior generalizes, it's about where the reinforcement flows. Keep digging, keep analyzing, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.